Yeah, so I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Embery, who is a Brexiteer, a left-wing Brexiteer, which I say something kind of we haven't had so much on this channel. A trade unionist, a writer for various publications, and a firefighter, I think. Paul, thank you very much for your time. I mean, the first thing I wanted to ask is, so obviously Labour went into the 2019 general election with a policy of having a second Brexit referendum. I mean, do you think that was a big mistake? Do you think that kind of isolated them from some of their original core support?
I think it was a disastrous policy. I think it was always going to result in Labour hemorrhaging millions of working class votes, and that's exactly what it did. And actually, if you look at the data from the election, it's pretty clear that as a proportion, Labour lost more amongst Leave supporters who had previously voted for Labour in 2017 the election than it did from Remain voters. So, yeah, I mean, the idea that you can say to millions of working class people, look, you took this decision, but we thought you got it wrong, and therefore we're going to force you to take it again, and there's not going to be any kickback from that, was completely naive, and they paid a big price for it.
Were you surprised by just how kind of intense the efforts to reverse the 2016 referendum results became?
I mean, I have to say I was slightly surprised by it because, I mean, I always felt that there would be a certain amount of anguish on the part of the Remain supporting establishment, and that there would be elements who would try to block Brexit from going through. But even I have to say was quite surprised at the intensity of that resistance and the all manner of tactics that were employed in order to try to stop the vote from happening. And I genuinely think that in years to come we'll look back at it and realise what a scandal it was that actually you had this situation where you had a referendum inside the country in which over 33 million people took part in good faith. There was a campaign for weeks and weeks leading up to it. And people took the decision and they said, we want to leave the European Union. And, in a democratic society, for large parts of the establishment, political class, certain parts of the media class, big business, etc., to do what they did to try to subvert that outcome was absolutely disgraceful. And we shouldn't forget what they tried to do. Democracy is a precious thing. And, for a while, we nearly lost it in this country. I'm glad we did.
I mean, were you surprised for kind of elements of the left seem to ally with big business and kind of what you term as the establishment in order to try and stop Brexit?
Well, I think actually, yeah, I think it's one of the talking points in modern British politics, the about turn that the left has done on the whole issue of the EU. If you go back to the common market referendum in the 70s, for example, Euroscepticism was a mainstream position on the left. You had a large number of Labour MPs who voted no in that referendum, included some real big hitters, the likes of Tony Benn and Michael Foot, Peter Shaw and Barbara Castle. A majority of trade unions voted no. I think what happened really is throughout the 1980s, the unions were battered by Margaret Thatcher. And they were looking for a saviour, and it was almost a case of any port in a storm. And the EU, in the form of Jacques Delors, came over to the TUC famously conference in 1988, I think it was, and sold the trade unions and the labour movement the idea of this workers' Europe. And suddenly, important principles like democracy went out of the window because the unions felt that this would actually be a bulwark to Thatcher in Britain. And that has almost become now an infatuation. And the truth was, what was sold as a dream really wasn't that. The European Union is an explicitly anti-socialist organisation from the left perspective. I see it as an institution that's in favour of market forces and austerity and privatisation. And I think it shows a lack of confidence on the left, that they just feel that we're not able to govern ourselves anymore, that actually we need to go to this neoliberal supranational institution in order to make our laws for us. And I think it's really disappointing that so many people on the left have fallen in with that idea.
Yeah. I mean, do you think kind of voices like you, kind of the left-wing case of Brexit, got a bit shut out of the debate? I mean, both ahead of the 2016 referendum and kind of in the period where it wasn't quite sure if it would go ahead or not.
I'm sorry, James, can you say that? You came out slightly.
Do you think the kind of the left-wing case of Brexit got slightly shut out of the debate? So both ahead of the 2016 referendum and ahead of the kind of 2019 general election.
Yeah, the left-wing case for Brexit is almost now like a fringe position within the Labour. As I said, it was once mainstream, it's now a fringe, and you get labelled as all sorts of things if you're on the left and you're against the EU. People think that you're a big fan of Nigel Farage, or that you are in the same camp as the sort of classical free market libertarians, liberals, etc. And actually, there is a perfectly strong and valid case for Euroscepticism from a left point of view, because it's about democracy, it's about accountability, it's about being able to govern ourselves, it's about looking at the EU and realising that actually many of its laws and aims and objectives are inimical, if you like, to the aims of trade unions and the left. And unfortunately, that debate was pushed into the margins. I mean, interestingly, I've never actually described myself as a Lexiteer, because I think the word Lexit suggests, by those who used it, suggests there was some sort of left-wing exit from the EU. I don't think there was. I mean, let's not forget that the referendum was held under a Conservative government. And in terms of coming out of the EU, it was going to be the Tory party who was going to largely dictate the terms of that. But for me, what Brexit was about is actually about clearing the path for a future Labour government to come along and be more radical, free from the shackles of the EU. So it was very much a long-term project. I always saw it as a necessary but not a sufficient step. And I would say to people on the left, look, socialism before Brexit is impossible. It has to be the other way around. And in that, I was following, the tradition of people I mentioned previously, the likes of Tony Benn, who regarded himself as a passionate European. Nobody could accuse someone like Tony Benn of being xenophobic or anti-European. He was an internationalist, but what he said is he also believed in democratic self-government. He believed in the right of people to be able to elect and remove those who made their laws, and he didn't like the idea of a good king over a bad parliament. And as I said, that was once the mainstream position on the left. It's something that I really think that the left needs to recover.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of seems to be one of the ironies. Certainly some of Corbyn's manifesto promises arguably would have fallen foul of European anti-competition legislation, or competition legislation, sorry. I mean, do you think that Jeremy Corbyn and some of the people around him were secret Brexiteers, but they secretly were kind of quite happy about what happened?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn is certainly a Brexiteer. He's been a lifelong Brexiteer, as was John McDonnell, actually. But I think the truth was that they very quickly in the debate became prisoners of the Parliamentary Labour Party. And I heard someone once say that Jeremy Corbyn had been placed under ideological house arrest on the issue. And I think that's a fair way of describing it. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn was close to Tony Benn and very much stood in that Tony Benn tradition. If you can go onto YouTube and see Jeremy Corbyn videos, which were filmed before he became leader of the Labour Party, that actually not that long ago, where he rails against the EU because he regards it as being a capitalist club that's in favour of big business and anti-democratic, etc. So, yeah, I mean, Corbyn and McDonnell certainly, possibly one or two people around them, but the Parliamentary Labour Party still are vehemently opposed to Brexit, and the number of MPs on the Labour benches who were in favour of it were tiny, and in many cases actually got a lot of criticism and a lot of abuse for holding the position that they did. But like I say, it's once upon a time they would have been part of the mainstream, but nowadays it's regarded as almost a crackpot position.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, you kind of mentioned it, but I mean, were you surprised by just how much kind of aggression there was from Remainers on the left, the Brexiteers on the left? I mean, I understand you had some trouble with your union, with the Firefighters Union. I mean, were you surprised by kind of how aggressive and intolerant it became?
No, because the truth is you only have to look at some of the people who were responsible for that hostility and that aggression, and very much part of the liberal class in this country, people who dominated the Remain campaign. Often people who are part of the professional classes, work in the media, see the rest of the country from their vantage point in cities, have no understanding of provincial Britain or the lives of the people who live in some of those post-industrial areas, and frankly have got used to everything going their way for so many years. And on this one occasion where they didn't win, on this one occasion where the working class, particularly in England, hit back and said, actually, you're not having it your way. We're not going to do what you want us to do, and to vote to remain in the European Union. They were completely disorientated by it, and they lashed out, and they turned their criticism on ordinary working class voters in many cases. Working class voters were talked as if they were thick and racist and bigoted, and they labelled as gammon and all sorts of things. And the way I describe it is that for years in this country, the liberal establishment completely tin-eared to the working class, and didn't address the concerns of the working class, and that's why the working class in large numbers voted against the establishment's wishes. And after that, the establishment spent the next 3 or 4 years proving them exactly right and continued not listening to them. So no, I wasn't terribly surprised by the intensity of it, because these were people who in many cases had got their own way frequently and just couldn't handle that not happening on this occasion.
Yeah. I mean, do you think Brexit was a core class issue?
I think certainly there was a divide in the sense that it was largely a working class vote, Brexit. If you look at some of the areas that voted the most heavily for Brexit, they were some of those areas where heavily populated by the working classes, some of those post-industrial areas, the north of the Midlands, etc. If you look at things like the data that came out about income in terms of how it relates to people, how people voted in the referendum, the further you went down the income scale, the more likely it was that people voted for Brexit. So yeah, I mean, undoubtedly clearly it was something that crossed all classes in terms of the vote. For example, also part of the Leave vote was a large number of, if you like, conservatives in the Shires, the Gold Club Tories, if you will. But there's no question in my mind that data showed, and I don't think you even really need to look at data to discover this. You only need to have a sense of what Britain is at the moment to know that actually, it was a working class vote largely that drove Brexit.
Yeah. I mean, do you think Labour's position on Brexit kind of represents almost like a wider move away from the working class and from kind of the values of the working class?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an issue, I think, where you can say it's just another issue where Labour has showed itself to be not on the same page as the working class, the people who it was set up to represent. Labour now, I've been a member of the Labour Party for 26 years. Labour now is very much a metropolitan kind of middle class, very liberal, very sort of student type party. And the old working class element within the party that used to be pretty dominant within it has been hollowed out largely. Actually, if you look at the figures, the membership base of the Labour Party, 77% of it fall into what's called the ABC1 social grade category, so largely the middle class. And I think that comes through in terms of the policies ideology today, in terms of the priorities of the party, and the fact that the party now often focuses on what many working class people would see as fringe issues, and the issues that are actually important to the everyday lives of working class people are relegated to a sideshow, or when they're raised on the doorstep, Labour activists just look down at their shoes and shuffle their feet in embarrassment. And yeah, there's absolutely no doubt that there's a chasm that has emerged between the Labour Party and the working class. And the obvious demonstration of that was the election in December, where Labour lost some seats which it had held for the best part of the century, and working class seats such as Grimsby and Wrexham, Wakefield and Don Valley and Bolsover that you would never dream would vote Tory, particularly not after 10 years of Tory government, during which they've imposed austerity, which has damaged some of its working class communities. So the question is, how did an old Etonian leading a Tory party manage to wipe Labour out in some of its working class areas? And I think that is a very stark reflection of the fact that Labour, does not speak for so many working class people, and I think that's a real problem. So it's a problem for Labour, it's a problem for the country too.
I mean, do you think that, in kind of in terms of this ideology, so obviously Labour originally was based around class-based politics, but now that kind of seems to be one of the aspects. So it's kind of got like an intersectionality approach. So, a kind of working class guy in Rotherham can be seen as privileged because he's white and cisgendered and so on. I mean, do you think that's part of the problem, that they no longer emphasise class as the key issue and they now have a whole series of things?
I think it is absolutely a problem. The issue of class has been sidelined, and in fact, Labour is now immersed in this identity politics business, and in fact, much of the left is now immersed in this identity politics business, where things such as people's unique biological attributes are seen as virtuous in themselves and used to divide people from each other and to elevate certain people to victimhood status, etc. And actually, that's got nothing to do with some of the very well justified traditional campaigns to overcome prejudice. You look at some of the civil rights movements in America in the 1960s, for example. This is something very different to that. This is dividing people from what I can see for no reason, and in doing so, actually undermining the strength of the working class, because the more it becomes fragmented, particularly over things like biological characteristics or sexuality or religion, it undermines the ability to have a broad-based campaign defending the interests of the working class around jobs, pensions, and decent housing and that kind of thing. And unfortunately, Labour has been sucked into it. I think that's partly a reflection of the fact that, it is now so much more of a middle-class party, which means that many of the people in control of it, many of its activists and its leading lights, are not necessarily personally affected so much by some of those economic issues, if you like, and some of those real pressing everyday concerns around housing, jobs, and law and order that affect working class people. And that's why so much of the party's narrative today is aimed at activist base rather than at the working class. And identity politics is simply a reflection of that.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, what I found really interesting about the 2019 general election is, there's been quite a lot of polling since, and it suggests that, not only obviously do the Tories take a bigger proportion of the working class vote than Labour, the Tories may have had a higher proportion of the working class vote than the middle class vote. Now, that's questionable because it kind of depends how you include pensions and things, but just the fact that you can seriously make that argument now is pretty incredible. I mean, do you think Labour's estrangement from the working class in 2019 was primarily about Brexit, or do you think it was also partly about Corbynism and it's kind of some of the fringe issues that Corbyn's been involved with?
I think it was both of those things. Brexit, I think, played a significant part. If you look at the 2017 election, when Labour went into that election and gave a guarantee in its manifesto to honour the referendum, it did better, much better than it did. It still didn't win, but it did much better than it did in 2019 when we went and said that we were going to ask for a second referendum. So Brexit was significant. Corbyn was significant. It was clearly unpopular on the doorstep. I think the danger, however, is that there are people inside the Labour Party, activists, who are in denial and think that Labour's problems can be attributed just to those things, Brexit, Corbyn. And actually, it is far, far greater than that. The Labour's problems set in well before Jeremy Corbyn took over. The problems in terms of the disconnect from the working class set in well before the whole Brexit issue. This is something that has been building and building and building for years, because the umbilical cord, if you like, that joins Labour to the working class has been slowly severed. And I think what the problem is now for Labour is the Conservatives have certainly understood that in order to attract those working class votes, you need to put forward a programme that on one hand, says, yes, we believe in economic justice and we believe in investment in some of our neglected communities and we believe in creating jobs and reindustrialisation, investment in infrastructure, etc. I don't particularly believe the Tories are going to do that, by the way, but nonetheless, that's their pitch. But at the same time, we also understand, these are the Tories. We also understand that, you want that cultural stability as well. You want an immigration policy that's sensible and doesn't mean that you're going to have rapid and large-scale movements of labour in and out of the community and some of the pressure that causes on public services, etc. And it's something that that I and others have sort of described as a sweet spot on the British political spectrum, where people are a bit to the right on cultural issues and actually to the left on economic issues. So actually, I think the millions of people out there were in favour of some of the Corbynomics, if you like, as it was called, in terms of redistribution of wealth, closing the gap between rich and poor, tackling regional inequalities, tackling boardroom excesses, etc. But just weren't with Labour on the cultural stuff. Labour was miles apart from people on the cultural stuff, and until it gets back on that page with people, it's not going to win. And other people have said, and I think it's right, that the reason the Tories won and will probably win next time out, if honest, is because it's easier for the Tories to tack left on economic issues than it is for Labour to tack right on cultural issues. Until Labour resolves that conundrum, it's got a big problem on its hands.
Yeah. I mean, do you think Labour in particular developed a problem with patriotism? I mean, I think it was the 2018 Labour Party conference, and there was kind of a scene of everyone was waving Palestinian flags rather than, Union Jacks. And you had kind of, John McDonnell praised the bombs and bullets of the IRA, which obviously killed a lot of British soldiers, predominantly from working class communities. I mean, do you think that Labour kind of detached itself from patriotism? That became a real issue?
I think yeah, the whole concept of patriotism is alien to lots of people inside the Labour movement these days. Once upon a time, that was never the case, but nowadays, because the movement itself is kind of infused with that kind of, as I said before, the metropolitan middle class, liberal people who actually don't feel the sort of patriotism that most working class people feel. It's something that the political commentator David Goodhart has described quite well in his book, The Road to Somewhere, where it talks about the difference between somewheres and anywheres. Somewheres are usually people who are a bit poorer, more working class, much more rooted, whereas the anywheres tend to be more middle class from the professional occupations, university educated, more money, broader horizons, etc. And that group of people often see the country as nothing more than a functional thing, a transactional thing, rather than something that you feel part of and something that you have affinity with. And for most working class people, it's almost just like an extension of the fact that they've got pride in their street or their town, their community, where they live. They see the nation as something just a bit bigger than that. And I think there is an element of a large element now of people who believe that any sort of affinity for country, any sort of feeling of patriotism, stems from some sort of innate bigotry or xenophobia, and there's this something in the back of their mind where they're constantly ashamed of the empire and feeling that they have to apologise for it. Any expression of patriotism is rooted in empire and that kind of thing. And I think people sense that. I think that people, working class people, realise that Labour is in a different place to them, and it is demonstrated by such things, for example, as the Emily Thornberry tweet when she went to Rochester and Strood in the by-election a few years ago, saw somebody flying a St George's flag out of their house and outside the house, and thought that this spectacle was so notable and unusual that it was worthy tweeting about. Actually, millions of working class people, they might not fly St George's flags, but they will understand why other people do. So it's a concept that is foreign to me.
Yeah. I mean, it was really interesting what you said about a lot of people, or kind of working class people, tacking to the left on economic issues and the right on social issues. And when you combine that with, as you say, Labour's increasingly middle class membership, I mean, do you think some of Labour Party's positions, such as arguably a certain softness on law and order, that a laxness on immigration, are essentially middle class positions, as in because, I mean, obviously crime heavily disproportionately affects working class communities. We know that. Again, with immigration, if insofar as there's any competition for jobs, it's not really for judges and lawyers and so on. I mean, do you think that some of the positions Labour have taken, which they think are progressive, are actually kind of middle class neoliberal positions?
I absolutely think that, and I think that the programme, the priorities of the Labour Party today is, and not just the Labour Party, the wider Labour movement, some trade unions as well, are dominated by the priorities of the middle class and what the middle class see as the important issues and the everyday concerns of working class people. I wouldn't say they don't feature at all, but they're relegated to a sideshow in some respects. And it is because, you know, in many cases, the people articulating these policies are not necessarily affected in the way that working class people are. So, you know, you will constantly, I'm involved in the Labour Party and I go to the Labour Party annual conference every year, and you will constantly hear stuff about, you know, human rights and climate change and trans rights and Palestine, LGBT rights, etc. And I always say to people, look, there is a place for that. I certainly would never suggest that you shouldn't debate those issues. Of course, you need to debate those issues. But actually, you also need to debate law and order and its impact on working class communities and what you're going to do about it. You need to debate immigration because that's a constant talking point on the doorstep. You need to debate, you know, the issue of the family and how breakdown has affected society, the breakdown of the family has affected society. You need to talk about things like national identity. Labour doesn't want to talk about these things, and so far as it does, you know, it's an embarrassing, strained conversation with most activists. Yeah. They think that when you talk about those issues, they are, you know, inherently right-wing issues, and so we shouldn't even move on to that territory. And we've seen the price of that. Working class people who are anxious about some of these issues see the Labour Party not talking about them, not giving enough priority to them. You know, they get Labour activists turning up on the doorstep, or they see literature or interviews on TV with Labour leaders talking about climate change constantly, and people think, actually, you know, your priorities at the moment are not mine. And we've ended up being absolutely emasculated at the ballot box.
Yeah. I mean, do you think the Labour Party can be saved? Can it be restored to what it was, or is it too late now?
I think there's a mountain to climb. I don't think it's impossible. I think if you look at the history of the Labour Party, it does swing. You know, who would have predicted, for example, that prior to 2015, Jeremy Corbyn was going to take over the Labour Party or be elected as leader of the Labour Party? Suddenly, you know, the whole ethos and demographic of the party completely changed very, very quickly. It became a much more left-wing party. Yeah, no one would have predicted that just a few months before it happened. So, you know, for me, I don't think it's quite a lost cause. I think the Labour Party is still the only, certainly UK-wide party of the left with potential to speak for working class people. It's still the union, still the party, sorry, to which most trade unions are affiliated. And, you know, not most trade unions, certainly a number of trade unions. And until that changes, then it's probably the only show in town. So, you know, it's not easy, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it's not impossible.
I mean, one final question, a bit of a cheeky one, but do you think Keir Starmer is part of the solution or part of the problem?
Well, I think he was certainly part of the problem in the sense that he was the architect of the second referendum policy, which led to such a catastrophe in the election. I've been slightly encouraged, no more than that, slightly encouraged by a couple of things he's said and a couple of decisions he's taken since he was elected. I think he's elected a very good director of policy called Claire Ainsley, who does not come from that, if you like, that traditional pro-Remain, you know, pro-middle class, very liberal part of the establishment, Guardian reading wing of the party. She's written positively about Brexit. She's written about the importance of the family, etc. So that was an interesting move. We saw him recently talk by Zoom to voters in Bury, where he emphasised the importance of patriotism and the importance for Labour to understand the importance of patriotism. So some of that stuff. But saying it is easy. That's the truth. Saying it is easy. Actually putting it into practice and making the Labour Party an organisation that millions of working class people can relate to again and can look at and think, actually, yeah, you look like me, you sound like me, you speak for me, you understand my concerns. You know, that is one hard task. And you know, whether he's the man to achieve that, I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, I know I said one last question, just one final question. I know that I think it was a couple of weeks ago in an interview, Keir said something like, you know, the Brexit debate is over. We're kind of drawing a line under it, and strongly implied that he wouldn't be pushing for Britain to rejoin the EU or anything like that. I mean, presumably for you, that's a massively encouraging sign.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is, but you know, he can say that, but let's not forget he's got a party to convince, and the party itself is overwhelmingly pro-Remain, and I suspect much of the party would jump back into bed with the EU at a moment's notice if it got the chance. And we've got the whole thing coming up at some point about whether or not we should seek an extension to the transition period. I think that's going to be a big call for Keir Starmer and Labour. I think if they truly want to show that they understand working class communities and why they lost so many millions of working class votes, then you know they need to be really careful about demanding an extension, because people will feel that we're just rerunning the saga of the last 4 years, where the Labour Party and other parts of the establishment are just trying to keep us in the EU by default. So that's going to be a big call. So, you know, him saying, yes, you know, we understand the position on the EU, we're not going to refight that back, is one thing he's got to convince the party. I'm not convinced that he's able to do that. So.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Paul, it's been a real pleasure. It's been really interesting. Thanks a lot for your time.